Poor girl helps a stranger with change. The next day he knocks on the door with a suit and security guard, and what he reveals leaves the entire neighborhood speechless. In line at the grocery store, with only coins in her pocket and her eyes lowered in shame, Ellie reached out to help an elderly man complete his change for a bottle of milk. He'd forgotten his wallet. The other customers, hurrying along, huffed impatiently. One of them muttered loudly, "That one should mind her own business." "Look at her clothes," people laughed. Ellie, in her dirty cleaning uniform, just smiled and said, "Today it's him, tomorrow it could be any of us." The old man stared at her for a second longer than usual. The next day, as Ellie was cleaning the entrance to the building where she worked, a black car with tinted windows pulled up. The same man got out, now in an impeccable suit, escorted by 2 security guards. He calmly walked up the steps, stopped at the door of her humble home, and said something that made the entire neighborhood emerge from their windows in disbelief. "You don't remember me, do you?" he said, holding out a thick envelope. Ellie, still holding the bucket, shook her head. He opened the envelope and showed a yellowed photo. "This girl here saved me 22 years ago. I was homeless. It was you." The neighborhood fell silent. He pointed to the mansion at the top of the hill. "Today it's yours." Ellie fell to her knees in shock. But what no one expected was that the millionaire carried an even bigger secret. He was the biological father she'd never known. And what's more, that visit wasn't a gift, but a test. What he did next left everyone in absolute silence. Before continuing, I want to invite you to subscribe to the channel and like this video so you can continue receiving our real stories. Thank you very much. The town was small, but its eyes were wide. People knew everyone's children's names, what each one did, and most importantly, what they didn't. Mornings began with the smell of bread from the corner bakery, and rumors spread faster than the local newspaper. This was the setting in which Ellie grew up. She lived at the end of a street of simple houses, where the cracked asphalt divided the neighborhood's hope from the dust of hard times. The house where she lived was more of an extension than a home, with peeling paint and a makeshift garden made of recycled cans. In the backyard, he raised 2 chickens and a lame cat named Sally. Ellie started her day before dawn, cleaning the floors of the central supermarket, then rushed to work at a cafe, and in the evenings, she still cleaned the wealthier houses on the hill. The residents saw her as invisible, except when they needed her to take out the trash. The wealthy ladies spoke to her without looking at her, as if looking were a privilege of those with a surname. Still, Ellie smiled. Always. The morning before the incident, Ellie was more tired than usual. She'd only slept 3 hours. The previous night's rain had seeped into her house through a broken tile, and as usual she'd improvised a bucket. But the bucket fell, soaking the clothes she'd laundered with such effort, and the mattress, her only mattress, was soaked in the morning. Even so, she got up, put on her cleaning uniform, and went out. She crossed the street as her neighbors exchanged glances. "Still wearing those old pants," a woman whispered on the porch. Ellie heard, but pretended not to. On the way to the market, she passed the group of young men who were always making fun of her. One of them shouted, "Hey, Ellie, when are you going to buy a car with that fortune in coins?" She laughed. She knew that if she answered, she would lose the light-heartedness she'd promised never to abandon. The market was crowded. It was a sale day. Ellie just wanted to buy bread and some coffee. In line, she noticed a simple-looking man rummaging through his pockets, trying to top up a carton of milk. He stammered, clearly embarrassed. The other customers rolled their eyes. "Hurry up, Grandpa!" Ellie, without thinking, grabbed her last few coins and held them out. "Here, today's on me." The man stared at her silently. She smiled. "Trust me, this milk is worth more than it looks." The old man accepted with a nod and left, disappearing into the aisles. Ellie had no idea that such a simple gesture would be the beginning of something that would turn her world upside down. The next day, the city awoke to a hubbub. A black car, the kind no one had ever seen around here, pulled up in front of her house. The tinted windows hid the person inside. A tall man, dressed in an impeccable suit and with an unreadable expression, got out. 2 security guards accompanied him. The neighborhood peered out from behind the curtains. The children stopped playing. The neighbors whispered as if they had planned the surprise. Ellie, kneeling on the sidewalk, washing the floor with soap, stood up in confusion. The man walked toward her with slow, steady steps. He stopped in front of her door, looked around, and said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "This house isn't yours anymore. It's mine now." The crowd fell silent. Ellie froze. A whisper drifted through the windows. Are they evicting her? But then he held out his hand with a golden key. "Because you live up there now, in the mansion on the hill." He pointed. What he said next made even the biggest gossips shut up. Ellie never knew what an ordinary childhood was like. There were no pink bicycles, no birthday parties, no laughter in the backyard with Mom and Dad looking out the window. Her first home was an old orphanage in rural Tennessee, where the walls were damp and the beds colder than the hug she never received. She was left there at just 2 years old without a note, without a family name. They named her Ellie because that was what was embroidered on her shirt. And that's how she grew up, just one of many, trying not to cry at night so as not to disturb the other girls, learning to be strong before she even knew what pain was. At 7, she watched her best friend get adopted while she stayed behind. At 10, she was washing the mess hall floor cloths and helping make soup on days when the food supply was low. At 13, she ran away from the institution after an incident where one of the caretakers pushed her hard for talking back too loudly. She wandered for days until she was taken in by a lady named Myra, the owner of a thrift store who let her sleep in the back in exchange for services. Myra was the closest thing to family Ellie knew. He gave advice with a drawl, offered old soup that smelled of affection, and always said, "You're worth more than these rags say." Ellie believed her. At 15, she got her first steady job as a kitchen hand. She spent all day among grease, pots, and harsh orders. No one asked her age. No one wanted to know her past. She just worked, and that was what she clung to, her work. The idea of building her own life even on the rubble of pain was what kept her going. She never asked for help. She never cried in front of anyone. He was ashamed to show any weakness. At 18, she rented her first room with a thin mattress and a broken refrigerator. She paid the rent by selling candy at schools and at night cleaned offices. Ellie knew she was poor, but she also knew she had something no one could take away, her dignity. At 20, she suffered a great loss. Myra died in her sleep. Ellie buried the only person who had ever treated her with love without even being able to afford the coffin. She found herself alone again. She cried in secret for weeks, but then lifted her head. "If I fall apart now, it's all over." She packed her few remaining belongings and moved to a bigger city, trying to start over. But the new streets brought old looks, contempt, judgment, indifference. The city was cold, and the people even colder. Even so, Ellie maintained her politeness, her kindness, her care for others. She cared for the elderly, helped in churches, gave what she could to those with less, even if it meant going to bed hungry. She knew the value of a good deed, and she believed with all her strength that good would return. One day, someday, even if it took a while. The curious thing was that Ellie was carrying a small wooden box containing an old photograph, a faded image of a homeless man smiling with a girl with disheveled hair. Herself at 5 years old and a stranger. Myra had said that the man had been kind to Ellie when she got lost once, and that he had promised to return. He never did. But Ellie never threw away the photo. She always had the strange feeling that the man would reappear, that there would still be a reckoning between the past and the present. She didn't know it, but this feeling was about to become real. On that morning of grey skies and muggy air, Ellie set out with the coins. She'd saved all week, $7.42. That's what she had left after paying her back rent and buying cat food. She passed the market, where the smell of ripe fruit mingled with the smell of frying from the food trucks. She knew she couldn't buy much, but she still wandered among the stalls like someone who still believed in the right to dream. It was then that she saw the scene. A frail, elderly man in shabby clothes trying to pay for a bottle of milk with a handful of nickels and dimes. The attendant eyed him with boredom. The customers behind him were already huffing and puffing. A man in a tie grumbled, If you don't have any money, you don't buy it. You'll hold up the line somewhere else." The old man trembled with shame. And there, amidst that silent tension, Ellie acted. He reached into his pocket and paid for the milk. "Here, sir. It's all right now." The silence that followed was crueler than any scream. People looked at her as if she were an alien for giving away her last coins. The man took the milk with teary eyes. He tried to thank her, but Ellie cut him off with a kind gesture. "You're welcome. Just do the same for someone someday." And he continued on his way. What she didn't see was the man's expression change as he left the market, as if he'd just confirmed something, as if he'd been waiting for that very act. And that was why, late that afternoon, an unusual movement began in the neighborhood. First, a black SUV drove slowly through the narrow streets, drawing suspicious glances. Then it stopped at the corner, and from there a tall man got out, wearing an Italian suit, polished shoes, and carrying himself like an executive. A security guard opened the back door, and that was when residents began to emerge from their homes. "What's going on?" they whispered. Some were already speculating. Is it an eviction? Did someone die? But when they saw the man look directly at Ellie's house and begin walking toward her, the whispers turned to anxious murmurs. What no one knew was that very morning, one of the neighborhood kids, the arrogant Ryan, heir to a small construction company and known for constantly mocking the humble, had made a bet with his friends. They were sitting at the bar across the street, watching Ellie walk by. "Want to bet how much that little cleaning lady can't last another month here? With this savings, she'll go back to the country where she came from." Everyone laughed, but Ryan went further. "Really, I'm going to make her fall in love with me, just to show that even dignity has a price." The bet was registered amid toasts and laughter. No one imagined that this cruel comment would be overheard by the man in the suit himself, who had stopped by chance and heard every word. Much less did they imagine that he had known Ellie for longer than anyone suspected. Hours later, Ryan, unaware of anything, would see the same man knock on Ellie's door with a golden envelope. And in that envelope was the answer to the humiliation he was about to commit. A cruel twist of fate that for now was waiting for its right moment to explode. The clock of karma was ticking, and no one could stop it. The first contact between Ellie and the man in the suit was a strange one, as if taken from a movie. Her hands were still dirty with soap and her knee wet from the sidewalk when she saw him standing in front of her. Someone like him wasn't common there. The surrounding houses didn't receive visitors arriving with private security. Ellie, uncomprehending, looked around, trying to confirm there hadn't been some mistake. The man smiled kindly, but his eyes betrayed something deeper. There was a tenderness there, mixed with a kind of restrained nervousness. He spoke softly but firmly. "You helped me yesterday at the market with that milk." Ellie stood, wiping her hands on her worn apron, and nodded, disconcerted. "Oh, yes, but it was nothing, really." Then he did something unexpected. He took a photo from his pocket. It was an old photo worn with time. A 5-year-old girl beside a dirty man smiling on the steps of a church. "That photo is me with you, 20 years ago." Ellie frowned in astonishment. She recognized the image. It was the same one she kept in the wooden box. But how? Before she could react, the man held out an envelope. "I looked for you for years, but you had no name, no address, just this memory, and now you've appeared again, exactly the same." Ellie, still in shock, took the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a letter, handwritten, and a golden key. The letter explains everything, but the key is to the house upstairs, that mansion. The house is yours now. Ellie laughed as if it were a joke, but the security guards behind her confirmed it with serious looks, and the entire neighborhood began to gather at the windows, recording with their cell phones, whispering, trying to understand what was happening. That man, whom she now knew, was a millionaire, turned to the crowd and declared loudly, "This girl saved my life twice, and she doesn't even know it." Ellie stood there, motionless, envelope in hand, while everyone around her tried to fit the pieces of this meaningless puzzle together. The millionaire then leaned closer in a more intimate tone and said almost in a whisper, "But before I explain everything, I need to see how far the eyes of those who despise you go. I want to see who's who here." Ellie stared at him, surprised. He didn't just want to thank her. He wanted to observe, judge, test. She didn't understand why, but something in his tone prevented her from questioning. And so, he left. He didn't enter the house. He didn't explain anything else. He just smiled and left, leaving Ellie surrounded by confused, envious, angry, and disingenuous looks. Some tried to approach her. "Friend, what's this story? Did you know him? Is that about the mansion true?" But Ellie didn't answer. She went upstairs, locked the door, sat on the floor with the envelope in her lap, and tried to understand what was about to change in her life. Outside, Ryan watched from the sidewalk. The bet he'd made hours earlier now seemed like a trap for himself, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. He smiled at his friends and said, "Now that she's rich, it'll be more fun." What he didn't know was that the millionaire had heard everything, every word, and he'd decided, right then and there, to let the game continue. Because within this cruel game lay a lesson that needed to be taught, and Ellie would once again be the key to it all. The following days were like a hurricane of glances, whispers, and masks. The neighborhood that had always ignored Ellie now smiled broadly. The same people who had mocked her outfit now asked if they needed help painting the facade of their house. The ladies who had turned up their noses when she passed by with the bucket of water now called her honey. Ellie, however, maintained the same routine. She continued cleaning, cooking, caring for the cat, and going to work. She still didn't use the key to the mansion. She didn't feel ready. The envelope, tucked under her pillow, remained unopened. There was something in the man in the suit's gaze that said, "Wait." So she waited. It was during this break that Ryan decided to act. The game between him and his friends was more intense than ever. Now the cleaning lady's rich. Imagine the story when I win her heart, and then disappear. It'll be legendary. His friends encouraged him, laughing as if it were a sport. He began to show up frequently in front of Ellie's house, offering rides, cheap flowers, forced compliments. "You look different, Ellie. You have a glow now." She, suspicious, responded politely but kept her distance. The instinct she'd built over years of survival wasn't easily fooled. But Ryan was persistent. He'd arrive wearing expensive clothes, strong perfume, and a smile practiced in the mirror. One day he invited Ellie to dinner at a downtown restaurant, saying he just wanted to get to know her better. Ellie, against all better judgment, accepted. She wanted to believe the world could change, that someone could indeed see her beyond the uniform. She went to dinner wearing a simple dress Myra had given her years ago, the same one she had worn to her funeral. Upon arriving, she noticed the place was packed, elegant, with members of the local high society. Ryan was waiting for her with a cynical smile. He led her to the table, but throughout dinner he made veiled jokes about her past. "Did you know Ellie used to clean toilets, guys? Now she's going to need an etiquette lesson." The laughter grew louder. A waiter dropped a glass and Ryan shouted, "Ellie, are you going to clean that up? It's in your blood." The entire table burst into laughter. Ellie froze. Her eyes welled up, but she controlled herself. She stood up, lifted her chin, and left without saying a word. Her silence screamed louder than any insult. On the way back, walking through the cold streets, Ellie felt the ground crumble beneath her feet. For a moment, she considered throwing away the golden key. She considered running away again. But something inside her burned. She knew she had been tested, and she knew with certainty that someone was watching, someone who wanted to see how far society's contempt could go, and who perhaps was waiting for this moment of public humiliation, so they could reveal the truth. When Ellie got home that night, she took the envelope from her pillow and held it in her hands. She still hadn't opened it, but for the first time, she was ready. And while the city slept, the millionaire watched the dinner footage in his darkened office, his fists clenched. The video, discreetly captured by one of his security guards undercover at the restaurant, showed everything. The laughter, the insults, the pain in Ellie's eyes. He silently turned off the monitor. He Didn't need to say anything. He simply stood, walked to a file cabinet, and pulled out a file bearing the name Ryan Crawford. The game had changed, and now it was fate's turn to play. The next morning, the sun hadn't yet broken through the clouds when Ellie woke with determination. The envelope she'd kept hidden for days now weighed like a silent bomb in her hands. She sat on the edge of the bed, took a deep breath, and with steady fingers broke the wax seal. The smell of aged paper mingled with the scent of weak coffee wafting from the kitchen. The letter began simply, "If you're reading this, it's because you've finally seen who they are, and most importantly, who you are." The handwriting was elegant, but charged with emotion. The text said that the man, the same one from the supermarket, was a former businessman who had lost everything in his youth after a mental health crisis. He had lived on the streets for years, and one cold night, without strength or faith, he was saved by a little girl who found him under a bridge and gave him an old blanket and a piece of bread. You, Ellie, 5 years old. He never forgot her look, nor her gesture. Afterward, he rebuilt his life with effort, and when he managed to get back on his feet, he swore that one day he would find her. The photograph, taken that day by a volunteer, was his only clue for decades. But there was more. The note continued. "When I saw you at the market, I knew instantly it was you. Only someone with the Iwa. Same soul would be able to repeat that gesture again, this time with coins as before with bread." Ellie wept silently, tears falling onto the paper. The letter also said the mansion was real. The will was signed. The house was rightfully hers. But he needed to see something first. He needed to see if she had kept her soul clean even when surrounded by mud. And he needed to see who the town was, if it was still a place where kindness died or flourished. Ellie closed her eyes and smiled, painfully. Then she put on her cleaning uniform as usual. But now as she walked the streets, there was something new in her gaze. She knew everything. She knew she was being watched, that she was being tested. And more than that, she knew that the others' contempt was a reflection of their own misery. When she passed Ryan in the square, he still tried to charm her. "Sorry about yesterday. It was just a joke." Ellie just looked at him. A deep look, not angry. It was wise. A look that said, "I saw all of you." He fell silent. He hadn't expected that. He was used to screams or tears, but that serenity dismantled him. At the cafe, her former colleagues tried to treat her with forced friendliness. "Ellie, you're looking quite chic these days, huh?" she replied with a slight smile. "Don't worry, I still see everyone the way I always have." Some laughed nervously. Others looked away. The cafe walls seemed to close in. It was as if, suddenly, no one could hide what had always been on display. Later, as she passed the mansion's entrance, Ellie paused for a few minutes. She took in the gate, the porch, the immaculate garden. She knew it was all hers. But she didn't go in. Not yet. Instead, she climbed to the highest point of the hill, where she could see the entire city below. There, with the wind in her hair, she whispered, "I knew it. I always knew someone saw me, even when no one else did." And at that very moment, from the car parked in the distance, the millionaire watched, his eyes full. She knew, and yet she chose to wait. He smiled, because she had passed the most important test, that of never letting her heart become tainted. Ryan woke to his phone vibrating non-stop. Notifications of likes, reposts, and messages from friends mocking him. "Dude, you went viral." Uncomprehending, he opened the attached video. It was a recording of dinner at the restaurant, the exact moment he humiliated Ellie in front of the full table, followed by the piercing silence of her exit. But the video wasn't filmed on any ordinary phone. It was clear, with cinematic framing, perfect sound capture, even focusing and zooming in on the guests' embarrassed looks. Someone had edited it. Someone wanted it to be seen. And now it was all over local social media with the caption, "When money talks loudly, but character shouts even louder." Ryan froze. He scrolled through the comments. Hundreds. Thousands. "Coward. You do that to no one, much less someone who looked at you with respect." The whole city needs to see this. In that instant he understood. There was someone behind this, someone powerful, someone who knew. His heart raced. He ran to his father's company and burst into the room. "Dad, this is going to ruin my name. You need to delete this." His father, watching the video, fell silent. After a few minutes, he simply said, "You are no longer my successor." The sentence fell like a sentence. The construction company won't survive this. Investors are calling, clients are asking for refunds. You threw everything away and out of vanity. Meanwhile, the millionaire, sitting in his quiet office, placed a folder of documents on his desk. One of the papers was a birth certificate, yellowed with age, with a handwritten alteration. Ellie's name added next to the daughter field. He had discovered it only 2 years earlier, after hiring a detective to find the girl in the photo. His quest led him to records of interrupted adoptions, orphanage, reports, and a nearly erased detail. The name of Ellie's biological mother, a woman he had met one night at a community shelter years ago. The DNA confirmed it. Ellie was his daughter. He wanted to tell her in person, prepare for the moment. But he needed to be certain of who she had become. He wanted to observe from afar, see what the pain had done to her soul. And now he was certain. Not only had she kept her essence, but she was better than he had ever been. That same day, Ellie received an envelope in the mailbox. Inside was just one sheet of paper. On it was a handwritten sentence. "Blood may be accidental, but love is a choice. Tomorrow, if you want answers, find me where we first met." No signature. But she knew. She knew it was him. And more. She sensed there was something bigger behind that look, something that transcended a simple gesture of gratitude. It was as if everything was connected. The photo, the gesture at the market, the golden key, the silent glances. Something in her chest began to pulse differently. And even without fully understanding, Ellie began to prepare herself for a reunion and for a truth that would change everything she thought about herself. The next morning, Ellie didn't show up at the cafe where she worked, or at the supermarket, not even at the modest house where neighbors peeked through curtains, hoping for any sign of her. The house was locked, the cat was nowhere to be seen in the yard, and the sidewalk bucket remained upturned in the corner, as if time had simply frozen there. The neighborhood began to whisper. Some said she'd run away, others that the millionaire had taken her away. An older woman swore she'd seen a black car drive away with her at 5 in the morning, but no one knew for sure. Only silence. Ryan, on the other hand, felt his world crumbling. He had lost the trust of his father, his company, his friends, many of whom were now drifting away, afraid of being cancelled by default. His vaunted reputation had turned to dust. He tried to text Ellie, but they all bounced back unread. He went to her house, but no one answered. He shouted her name on the sidewalk like a madman. Nothing. For the first time, he felt something he had never experienced before: absence. And within that absence, an unbearable guilt. Meanwhile, the millionaire watched the city with calculating eyes. Ellie was with him. Not in the mansion, but in an old mansion in the countryside, where he often went to escape the world. It was a safe, quiet place, surrounded by trees and memories. Ellie sat before a fireplace, the envelope containing the birth certificate in her hands. She already knew everything. He had told her, without embellishment, without ceremony. He said he had met her many years ago, that he never imagined that meeting would have such profound consequences, that he had never known about the pregnancy, that he had tried to take his own life months later, lost in drugs and poverty, and that he only came to his senses thanks to the memory of the girl who had given him a blanket. That girl was his daughter. Ellie listened to it all in silence. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply remained silent, her gaze fixed on the flames. When he finished, she asked, "Why now?" And he replied, "Because now you are ready, and so am I." Ellie needed a few days. She stayed in the mansion, thinking about everything: her lifetime of pain, the absence of a father, the years of struggling alone, the gesture. At the market, The golden key, the dinner, the humiliation, and the silence that now enveloped her. For the first time, no one expected anything from her. No one judged her, nor praised her. It was just her thoughts, and the truth. And in that space of introspection, something inside her began to shift. It wasn't forgiveness, yet, but it was understanding. It was a crack in the pane that allowed light to enter. Around town, her absence began to weigh heavily. The cafe had to replace staff. Because many customers didn't want to be served by someone who had laughed at Ellie. The school where she cleaned classrooms every day put up a sign, "Come back soon, we miss you." Even her neighbors began to understand that her kindness wasn't weakness, it was strength. And Ryan was beginning to miss not only Ellie, but the version of himself that existed near her. He knew he had lost her, but for the first time in his life, he wanted to be someone worthy of finding her again. The millionaire then devised a plan. Ellie needed to see for herself the effect she was having, in silence. And so, one Friday night, she reappeared, alone, atop the hill, observing the city below as if for the first time. No one knew, no one saw. But there, on that balcony where the silence of the rich once resided, now resided the conscience of the girl who had won, and who was about to decide whether to return or turn the page forever. Ellie's absence became a disturbing echo in the city's corridors. What had once been mockery turned to discomfort. What had been a joke was now silence. The faces that had ignored her now looked away at the memory of the public humiliation she had suffered. Ryan's video still circulated, gaining traction, reaching not only the neighborhood but the entire city and even nearby towns. Local newspapers commented, "Housekeeper humiliated at elite dinner receives key to mansion from mysterious millionaire." Blogs began to investigate. Who was she? Who was he? Why had a poor girl been gifted a mansion? The mystery grew, but, contrary to expectations, Ellie didn't appear for interviews or answer questions. Her silence became an invisible, disturbing scream. Meanwhile, Ryan faced the consequences. His company began losing contracts. 2 partner construction companies withdrew from projects. A group of influential women in the city wrote a public letter of disapproval, demanding his exclusion from social events. And the final blow came when his father, embarrassed by investors and clients, officially resigned as heir to the construction company. "You no longer represent the family name. The company will survive, but without you." Ryan left the room, his eyes burning. For the first time he realized that what he had lost wasn't just power, it was respect, dignity, and perhaps something he didn't even know he needed, the truth about himself. The streets no longer treated him with reverence. Boys who once asked for tips now ignored him. Girls who flirted with him walked away. Around every corner he seemed to hear a phantom laugh, his own, echoing in the restaurant. A laugh that now hurt. He tried to make up for it with charity. He donated to shelters. He visited orphanages. But everyone could see it. It was remorse, not true repentance. On the other side, the millionaire watched everything with patient eyes. He knew that Ellie's public humiliation had become a mirror. Now, Ryan was feeling it firsthand. Poetic justice didn't come with screams. It came with the silent fall of a man before his own shadow. Ellie, from afar, observed everything. The millionaire discreetly kept her informed. He shared headlines, comments, reactions. She didn't rejoice in his misfortune. But she felt something different, not revenge, not pleasure, but reparation. As if, finally, the world were adjusting its scales. And then, one golden afternoon, the city received a shock. The facade of the cafe where Ellie worked had been renovated, with a gleaming new bronze sign. Ellie's cafe, the owner of the place, announced on social media. She didn't want the mansion, but she accepted half of the deal. The commotion was widespread. It was the first time someone from that region had achieved something with dignity and silence. It wasn't a scandal, it was merit, and everyone knew it. Ellie wasn't returning as a victim, she was returning as a symbol. And Ryan, as he passed by, and saw the new name emblazoned on the entrance, he felt a pang in his stomach, not out of envy, but out of something crueler, true regret, the kind that finds no excuse. That can't be erased with flowers. He knew. The time for their reunion was approaching, and that, unlike in the past, this time it would be he who would lower his eyes. That night the millionaire walked alone through the mansion. The lights were off, and the silence was as dense as an empty cathedral. He stopped before the ancient fireplace in the main room and placed 2 portraits on the weathered wood, one of him dirty and haggard during his years on the streets, and the other of Ellie the day she handed him the coins at the market. For a moment he stared at the 2 faces, the past and the present, the misery and the redemption. He sighed. Time had done its job, revealing what appearances hide. But a weight still weighed on his chest, the certainty that he had failed as a father. Even if involuntary, the abandonment had left deep scars. And as much as he had given Ellie comfort, there was no gift in the world that could make up for the years of absence. On the other side of town, Ryan locked himself in his house. The media continued relentlessly. He couldn't walk outside without hearing whispers. A former teacher called him a local embarrassment in a post that went viral. The family company's stock price plummeted, and all because of a dinner, a gesture, a laugh. He spent hours reviewing the video. He paused over the details. Her look, his. Friends' laughter, the silence after the joke. And in a moment he realized Ellie wasn't embarrassed. He was the one who exposed himself. Her humiliation was a reflection of what was inside him. For the first time, Ryan cried without trying to control himself. The tears flowed with a pain he couldn't name, a mixture of guilt, emptiness, and longing for something that was never his, but perhaps could have been. In his notebook, he wrote a letter. Long. No cheap apologies, no pleas for her return. Just confessions. He laid his soul bare with words. He spoke of the bet, the vanity, the sense of power that gnawed at him, and at the end of the letter, a sentence that hurt to write, "If I had seen you as you really were, maybe I would be a better person today." Meanwhile, Ellie walked through the renovated hallways of the new cafe. She could smell fresh paint, furniture being delivered, her old colleagues now looking at her with genuine respect. It wasn't stardom. She was still the same. She cleaned tables, organized orders, served with a smile. But now when she spoke, everyone listened. And there at the back of the room was a framed photo. Her as a child, handing a blanket to a man under a bridge. No one quite understood. But whoever looked felt something. It was more than decoration. It was memory. It was truth. The millionaire, watching from afar, saw Ellie's transformation in real time. She didn't need the mansion or the titles. She had become what he'd always wanted to. Be whole, even after being broken so many times. And that inspired him. For the first time in years, he hung up the phone, cancelled meetings, and spent hours writing a letter to Ellie. A letter not as a wealthy man, nor as a benefactor, but as a father. Human, wandering, repentant. And when she placed the letter in the envelope, she sealed it with the same gold seal as the first. But this time, her hand trembling, because she knew the decision was now hers. And love, true love, only blossoms when it's free. Their reunion was near, but she would be the one to decide how it would end, or begin again. The reunion didn't happen with spotlights, applause, or a dramatic soundtrack. It was a grey morning, where fog shrouded the street, as if the world wanted to whisper rather than shout. Ellie walked down the hill with serene steps. She wore a simple navy blue dress, her hair tied in a low bun, her eyes steady. She walked to the old city park, the one she used to walk through on her cleaning days, where children played ball and the benches were always occupied by old men reading newspapers. On the last bench near the lake was he, the man in the suit, the man she now knew was her father. He stood there without security, without a car, without anything that normally surrounded him. Just him, and a small wooden box in his hands. When Ellie approached, he stood, but he didn't speak. He was vulnerable, as if every word were too dangerous to say. His eyes searched hers, but found no judgment, No anger. They found silence. That same silence Ellie had cultivated for years, not out of weakness, but out of strength. She sat beside him, and for a few seconds, they both simply stared at the lake, as if time needed to breathe. Then he held out the box. Ellie recognized it immediately. It was the same little box she'd kept since childhood, the same one where she'd kept the faded photo. But now, there was another photo inside, a more recent one, a portrait of her as an adult, captured at the exact moment she handed the coins to the old man at the market. I had this photo taken that day. I asked the security guard to discreetly escort me. I needed to keep this, so I'd never forget. His voice was low, almost a whisper. Ellie took the photo carefully, ran her fingers over the paper, and then took a deep breath. I don't blame you for leaving, but I won't say it didn't hurt. The sentence came out calmly, but it carried all the scars of the forgotten girl. He nodded. I also blame myself for not coming back, even when I could. A silence. But I saw you. When you gave me that blanket, it was the first time in years someone touched me without feeling disgusted. It saved me. And meeting you now is my chance to try to give back. Ellie turned her face to him, her eyes watering. I don't need the mansion. I never did. What I needed was to be seen. That's all. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to hold back the tears. So, look at me now. See me as I am, a broken man who loves you and who just wants a chance to walk by your side, whatever that means, as a friend, as a father, as anything you can offer me. She didn't answer. Not immediately. She took the box, closed it carefully, and sat there for long minutes. The two of them were silent, as if time had stood still, until Ellie stood up, looked up at the cloudy sky, and simply said, "Meet me here tomorrow. If it rains, it's not meant to be. If the sky clears, we'll try." And she left, without turning back. The millionaire remained on the bench, his heart suspended between hope and fear. And for the first time, he wasn't the one with the power. Night fell heavily, as if the sky held its breath, along with the two hearts that silently awaited the next morning's verdict. Ellie spent hours in her room, sitting on the edge of her bed, staring at the wooden box on the nightstand. Inside it now lay two photographs, the past and the present, colliding in silent images that spoke more than any letter. She held both in her hands, one on each side, as if still unsure which story to embrace. Outside, the wind howled, and rain threatened. Across town, the millionaire lay awake at the window of his old office. He'd turned off all his cell phones. He'd dismissed his employees. Just him, a mug of bitter coffee, and a clock that seemed to mock him with every tick. If it rains, she won't come. He repeated this mentally, like a man on the verge of losing his last chance in life. It wasn't about wealth anymore. It was about repair, about love, about what he could be if she would let him. As day began to break, the sky was covered in grey clouds. Ellie woke before her alarm, dressed simply, tied her hair up as usual, and walked to the porch. The smell of wet earth still lingered, but there was no rain, just a sky about to decide fate. She made some tea, drank it in silence, and then started walking. She arrived at the park before the agreed time. The bench was still empty. She sat down. She waited. The minutes passed. And then he appeared, without a suit, without security, with an expression filled with doubt and hope. He walked toward her as if crossing a thin bridge over a deep river. He sat down beside her, as before. Ellie didn't look at him immediately. She simply said, "Today I decide not by what you were, but by what I am." He slowly turned his face, as if in disbelief. "And what are you?" she ventured to ask. She took a deep breath. "I'm someone who survived absence, but who doesn't want to survive anymore. I want to live, and maybe forgive." A thick silence fell between them. Then Ellie opened the box right there, took out the old photo, and wordlessly placed it in his hands. Then she took out the new one, the one from the grocery store, and placed it on her lap. Now we have both parts, the beginning and the middle. All that's missing is the end. He smiled with tears in his eyes, but he didn't dare move. He knew the next step would have to come from her. Then Ellie slowly reached out and touched his hand, not as a daughter, not as someone forgiven, but as someone who chose to love without being held hostage by pain. And in that instant, the sky, which had remained closed until then, began to open. A ray of sunlight broke through the clouds, falling directly onto the bench where they were sitting. She looked up, smiled, and whispered, "I think so." He said nothing. He squeezed her hand lightly. Their reunion wasn't sealed. With words, but with a simple gesture. The chance had been granted. And now, everything depended on what they would build together. Unbeknownst to anyone, on that same park bench where life silently redirected itself, Ellie left something behind when she got up, the small wooden box. Inside, the two photos, one from the past, one from the present, and now a carefully folded sheet with a few handwritten words. The writing was firm, neat. It said simply, "What breaks us can also reveal us." I saw. Ellie didn't come back for her. She knew he would find her, and that he would understand what that meant. The cycle had ended. She walked back through the same streets where she'd been invisible for so long, but now no one needed to see her. She saw herself. She no longer needed to prove anything to anyone, not to the man who'd abandoned her, not to the boy who'd mocked her, not to the neighbors who'd reduced her to her uniform. The noise of the city continued as always, but within her, there was a new silence, a good silence, of peace, of justice not shouted but felt. Days later, the city awoke to a new buzz. The facade of the old mansion on the hill now had a new sign, a dull metal one, unostentatious. It read, Casa Myra. It was a shelter, a place for orphaned girls. Clean bathrooms, warm beds, open windows. Everything was done with the care of someone who knew the cold inside out. No one knew who financed it. No reporter was able to interview those responsible. But everyone talked about a young woman in a navy blue dress who would sometimes appear to read stories, plant flowers, or simply listen. On a cloudy afternoon, Ryan drove past the shelter. He stopped the car, got out silently, and watched the children play in the garden. Among them was a little girl with the same eyes that had once looked at him with respect. She laughed, ran to Ellie, and hugged her. Ryan smiled from afar. Then he left, without speaking to anyone. Some guilt, he understood, can't be washed. Away with words, but with the weight of those who decide to carry the memory of the mistake and learn from it. In the living room of Casa Myra, on a modest bookshelf, two frames sat side by side. The first held an old photo of the girl and the man under the bridge. The second held the image taken at the market. Between them a lit candle, ever renewed, ever alive. And that night, no one applauded. No newspaper reported it. But justice was served. And what the man did next, no one will ever know. All you know is that he returned to the park many times, and he always sat on the same bench, next to the wooden box. He never took that home, because some stories don't need to be carried, just remembered. If you've made it this far, it's because this story touched you in some way, so tell me in the comments, what would you have done in Ellie's place? I read everything with great care. Enjoy this moment and leave your like, subscribe to the channel so as not to miss the next stories, and now click on the video that appears on the screen, because it's even more surprising, and I bet it will move you from beginning to end. I'll see you there.